So Benjamin Franklin is credited for the saying, there's only two things you can depend on in this world. You probably know what they are: death and taxes. Well, I've got good news and bad news for you today. I'll tell you the good news first. I always like that first. The good news is I'm not going to talk about taxes. The bad news, I'm not going to talk about taxes. Kind of bold to talk about death and what's next. So I want to give you just a little bit of my background, of why I chose even to be able to be up here this morning today. I went to Hope College, Holland, Michigan. After that, I went to Western Theological Seminary. I'm an ordained minister in the Reformed Church in America. 3 years of seminary. I also did a full year's internship at the hospitals connected with Mayo Clinic. After that, I went to a small country church in upstate New York where I was pastor for 3 years. While I was pastoring there, I did additional chaplaincy training. And eventually after that, I became the director of pastoral care at a Catholic hospital in Albany, New York. Spent 23 years in Catholic hospitals in Albany, over in Ann Arbor, later on in New Jersey, and the last 14 in a secular hospital. I worked in hospitals and sometimes hospitals and hospice. So, with all that, I'm going to give you a secret. None of us is going to live forever. You probably know that. You probably don't even like to think about it. Maybe you don't even like to talk about it. But at some point in our life, the limo comes. And a limo takes many different forms. I like the image of a limo better than the rest of the stuff. It sounds better than a hearse or an ambulance or a stretcher. But sometime that limo is going to come. It's going to come. And I've seen it come. I've seen it come before a person took its first breath. And I've seen it, probably the oldest is 103, and probably every age group in between there. And sometimes a question I'd ask individuals when appropriate, I'd say, so what's next? So when I ask you that question this morning, and for those that are online as well, what's next? What comes to mind? What is going to be next when you get in that limo? And for me, being tall, I'm going to stretch out in that thing and go to sleep. And that's basically, I think, what happens. It depends a lot on your travel agency. So some people say, I don't have a travel agent. And so they go to sleep in a limo, and eventually they become fertilizer for trees and flowers. And when people tell me that, and if I don't know what else to say, I say, so how is that for you? And if they say that's fine, that's no problem, that's great. Some people have a Hindu travel agency or a Jewish travel agency or a Buddhist. And the Buddhist travel agents, they've got some great stuff out there. But we are the Douglas United Church of Christ, so we're going to go with a Christian travel agency. And for most Christian travel agencies, what happens next, in oversimplified terms, is heaven, right? So you ask somebody, how's that as an agent, what's next? And they say, well, heaven's next. Jesus was asked a question about heaven in the reading that we had today. He had a reading about this woman, and tradition back then was if you were married and your husband died, you would marry your husband's brother, as you heard. And she had like 7 of them, I think. All right? Just a side note. I don't know about your in-laws, all right? But when I look at my in-laws, there's none of them I would want to marry, male or female. So fortunately, that's not the tradition nowadays. What did Jesus say about that? He said, marriage isn't a thing in heaven. I like that concept. All the things that may restrict us in some ways don't seem to be an issue in heaven. Marriage can be restrictive, and you know that, especially if you're a single individual and you're meeting with a bunch of other married individuals. It feels kind of weird. Or if maybe your partner has died before and you wonder who I'm going to see in heaven. Or somebody you really don't like in the first place and you figure they might see him and you got to hide somewhere so you don't run across them. Heaven's not like that. All this, I don't think, everything that was a problem, everything that's an issue that we deal with, all the little cliques, all the BFFs, that's best friends forever. Don't fill the rest of the stuff in, all right? All that stuff, I believe, is gone. You're going to like those people. They're going to like you. All the things that restrict us in our life is no longer there. In Revelation it says, "For there's no longer any tears or sorrows, for all that is gone, and death is no more." What a beautiful image. I can only imagine what that must be like. So you think you're going to know people there? Another question I'd often ask, and a lot of people would say, "Yeah, I hope so." Well, how do you know if you will or not? Well, in Scripture, Jesus, in that same passage, you notice he didn't say she wouldn't know her husbands. Didn't say that. Just that she wouldn't be married to him. In another passage, in Jesus' transfiguration, the apostles identified Moses and Elijah. There was 1,000 years difference between those two, and somehow they knew who they were. I believe you're going to know people in heaven. And I'll tell you, because all my training, all my background didn't teach me as much as the people I interacted with. I've been with a lot of people when they took their last breath. And not all the time, but frequently enough for me to believe. Sometimes I would see them all of a sudden get clarity of eyes, and they'd look out and they see something, and often I would see a smile on their face. Sometimes they would mention a particular name to me, and I say, "Who was that?" And it's a family member that they somehow recognized or saw, or some person of the Bible. My father-in-law, Jan's husband, died at work. He had a massive heart attack. The limo came for him probably before he hit the floor. And we were at the wake, and some of the workers came up to us and said, "He said something to us right before he died, but we don't know if we should tell you." No, it wasn't about her husband. The word he said right before he died, and he would never, ever say this lightly. He said, "Jesus." And we believe that he saw Jesus at that particular point in time, and it gave us a great deal of comfort. Will you see people? I believe so. In 40 years, I have never been around somebody, and my median was hospitals and hospice. Never did I ever see somebody die crying. We cried a lot of tears, and I cried a lot of tears with people prior to, but not at the point of death. One minute they were here, and the next minute they were somewhere else. And some of you, I know I'm preaching to the choir, because you've been there as well with people that you remember and who you love dearly. I can only imagine what that's like. So what else can we do? Is there certain things we can do before the limo comes? Because we know it's coming, but do we just sit and wait? No, there's certain things that you can do and plan in advance to get ready for the limo. And somehow I think it's going to help your family members as well, because they worry about what life would be like without you. And I know some of you probably have that fear. What if my partner, my friend, my spouse dies before I? And it's always easier to be the first one out. I believe that, all right? But what could you possibly do? One of those things is take care of business. Take care of that unfinished things that you haven't done yet that you always meant to get around to. And I'm not talking about painting the bedroom. I'm talking about the harder stuff, those relational things. Sally was in our intensive care unit, and I would see her, and I'd always find out what people reached out to her into to get them through difficult times. And I know she never had any visitors. She never had any cards. She didn't watch TV. She didn't have a book. And I'd always look to try to find something that people could draw on as a source of strength. And faith wasn't real important to her either. And she says, "You know, my husband died. We didn't have any kids. I just recently moved away from the place I lived in. And so we were kind of scrambling." And finally, she mentioned about a sister. She says, "Well, I do have a sister. She lives about an hour away." I said, "Oh," I got all excited. "Oh, a sister." She says, "Well, we haven't talked in 20 years. I says, "Really?" I said, "If you don't mind asking, what happened?" She says, "Well, it was about money. I gave her some money. She never paid me back. And you know how things progress, and things kind of escalated, and we stopped talking to each other, and we haven't talked for 20 years. I said, wow. I said, was it a lot of money? She said it was $200. I said, I'll tell you what. I says, I'm going to go down to the ATM machine. I'm going to get $200, give it to you if you call your sister right now. And whatever it was, take the first steps to amend those things. And so later on, I saw her, and she had a big smile on her face. She said, I called my sister. We talked for an hour. And she's going to come in to see me. Take care of business. Take care of those things on this side that you can do that makes it easier for you when the limo comes and easier for your family when the limo comes. Wayne Titus has some great programs here for our church about our finances. Take care of those finances. Look after it. Figure out how to take care of those things. And sometimes you say, I've done that. Well, it's the things I don't know that I need to know. Maybe has some insights for us that we can gain from that. Do your advance directives. Do your living wills. And especially amend those relationships that may have been broken. Take the first step. Even if you weren't at fault, take the first step. One of the things I did as well is I worked in the emergency department. They would call me down. And whenever there was something that came in, emergency-wise, they'd have me on site. And sometimes the people there wouldn't survive, and a limo came for them. And the doctors would always have me come in with them as they talked to the family, and we'd sit down with the family, and he'd explain the medical terms and say, you know, your loved one didn't survive. I'll leave you with Reverend DeVries. He can talk to you about what's next. And so the doc would leave naturally. And I would be with the family, and often I would bring them into their loved one, all right? And they would tell me stories about them, touching stories, how they were caring or loving, but I also heard the things, the regrets. We had a fight in the morning before he left, and he had a car crash in the route. Or he never told me that he loved me, or I made a difference in his life. Do those things, please. Make it easier for your family. Reach out. You can never give enough compliments, all right? You can't tell enough people that you love them, or that they made a difference in your life, or they were important to you. Take care of those little things as well. John was a person under the care of hospice. John lived out in the country. He was pretty independent. He's kind of almost off the grid. So I'd go to see his house. I had to drive down this dirt road and wind through some trees and get out there. And he had this house that he built. He had this beautiful porch, and we'd sit on his porch. And John said, you know, the hospice people said I should write a letter to my kids. He said, I got 2 girls, and maybe something they could read when they turned 18 or whatever. He said, but I don't write so good. And maybe that's something you do. I have written letters to my kids that sometime they can read. I told them in advance, so it won't be a surprise to them, but I thought I'd put it in writing as well. That's something you might want to do. But for John, he said, I don't write so good. So he said, I got 2 shoe boxes. And he says, I've been putting things in the shoe box for my girls. And he said, and one, I put my pocket knife that I carried all the time in my pocket. And they know that would have a meaning. Another would love to play softball. So I have a softball that I signed. And he said, I have feathers from red-tailed hawks that are in these shoe boxes. Because if you look, and I looked up, and sure enough, there was a red-tailed hawk flying around his property. He said, red-tailed hawks are very possessive and very territorial. He says, they look after the region in which they fly. And he says, I told my girls, he said, I'm coming back to you as a red-tailed hawk. And I'm going to watch for you and keep an eye on you and make sure you're okay. Do those things while we can. We don't know. Let our families enjoy the memories, and may their memories be great and their regrets be few. Another thing we can do is let our wishes be known. A lot of times people don't know what's important to us. So Hilda was 91. She was in an intensive care unit as well. She was 91. And I was talking with Hilda, and religion was important to her, but not that great. But she said, you know, one thing I really, really enjoy, the thing I miss the most about not being home, she says, is my 4 o'clock martini. She said every day for years and years and years, I'd have a martini at 4 o'clock. And she says, they won't let me have one here in the hospital. So I got a hold of the doctor outside. I said, listen, doc, I said, This is her religion, all right? You know how you got to respect her religion. I said she'd have this martini, and she would think about it, and as she sipped this martini, she'd think about all of her blessings and all the difference that people have made in her life. I think you should put in an order for have a martini. He said, well, I don't know. He said, maybe one without alcohol. I said, no, I think she wants hers with Grey Goose. I said, what are you going to do, kill her? I said, she's been drinking this forever. She's 91. She's got terminal cancer. It's not going to hurt her any. Put the order in. So he put the order in. And from that point on, at 4 o'clock, you could see her family pouring that martini. Let people know what's important to you. Let them make it know that what's the difference. I've had already when I've gone with physicians where he said, we're at a crossroads with your loved one. We'd ask them what they want done, but they can't, they're not conscious. What do you think they'd want done? Should we stay aggressively treating or do more comfort care? And I'd always cringe when the family says, I don't know. We never talked about it. Let family know your wishes. Let them know what difference it makes, how important it is to you. John was, and I'll never forget this, and I'll close out with this one. This is a great story. And all these stories, by the way, are actually true. John was a landscaper, and he loved grass and mowed grass and green grass and yards. And that's what he did. He'd put sod in, he'd fertilize it, he'd water it. Our creation justice hadn't talked to John about there's a lot of alternatives to green grass and better for our environment than that. But he was kind of old school, and that was important to him. So he said, I always had the dream or the image that I would be in a bed of grass, stretched out as I breathe my last. And he asked the nurses, he says, can you bring me out there at midnight? Can you just take my hospital bed? He said, I'd walk there if I could, but I can't. Can you just walk my hospital bed out and put it, the ground's beautiful grass, he said, all right? He said, just put me out there. You imagine pulling into the hospital and you see half the patients out there lying in the grass, some breathing, some not breathing. He says, John, we can't do that, all right? He said, well, okay, at least I gave you my wishes. So one morning, I'll never forget, it was a Tuesday, he was in bed 4. And I got on the ICU and they said, John had a bad night. He had a turn for the worse. And I'd make rounds with the doctors and the multiple staff in the ICU, and we got to his bed. And I walked in, and his white sheet was covered in grass. The nursing staff and the aides went out into the lawn, and even though they couldn't bring John to the lawn, they brought the lawn to John. We can do things, but we can't do things if we don't know what your wishes or your desires are, so let those be known. I've been around, as I mentioned, death a lot, all right? And it doesn't scare me at all. It doesn't scare me. It doesn't. Dying's not easy. I recognize that, all right? But death is not the worst thing. There's a lot of things worse than death. So I'm going to close with a passage that John recorded Jesus saying. He recorded in John 14, Jesus said, and I'll give you the official version first. Jesus said, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In God's house are many rooms. And if it were not so, that I go to prepare a place for you. And when I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to yourself, that where you are, I may be also. Paraphrased, Jesus says to us, don't let the limo scare you. I'm your travel agent. I've got great things planned for you, just right for you. That might be different than the person sitting next to you, but just right for you. And I've been preparing it for you. So when you come, you won't be able to imagine what it's going to be like. And not only that, I'm not only your travel agent, making sure everything is absolutely perfect for all of eternity, but I'm going to be there with you as well. How often do you get a travel agent traveling with you to make things go smoothly? I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Amen.